Since the beginning of time, there have been tellers of stories and listeners to hear them. Every person has a story inside them, and every person has a story to tell. Today, we're going to celebrate the art of African and African American storytelling and talk that talk. But first, we're going to need your help.
African American storytelling began on the beautiful continent of Africa. In some villages and kingdoms, these storytellers were called griots. What were they called? That's right, griots. They were incredibly special and very important to the people in their community. Some even believed that griots were magical because they knew the stories of every person that lived in the village. They were walking libraries.
At night, the children of the village would gather around the griot, and he or she would tell them stories about how the world was created, or about a time when animals could walk and talk, and when people could fly, just like birds. These stories would teach the children of the village about right and wrong, how to treat the world around them, and how to treat each other.
Before the griot would begin a story, he or she would say, "I'll go," which means, "Are you ready to listen?" And the children will reply, "I may," which means, "Yes, I'm ready to hear." Let's try it. I'll go. You say, I think we could do better than that. I'll go. Very good. I think we're ready. Our first story comes from the African country of Nigeria. And Carol Griot is here to share this story.
This is the story of the Yes Sir Chief, Ago. The Yes Sir Chief was called Chief Yes Sir because everyone on his court said yes sir to everything he said. If he asked them what they thought about something he was going to do, he would say,
"What do you think?"
And all the men around him would say,
"Yes, sir."
Yes, sir, you are correct.
And he loved it. Well, on this particular day, the chief called the council together and everyone hustled into the chambers and he sat on his throne and said,
"I have a problem and I want there to be a solution. You are my great wise men. Tell me what to do."
And of course, they nodded and said,
"Yes, sir."
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Their chief said,
"I have been unable to sleep for the last several weeks, and it's really getting on my nerves."
"Your Highness, what could be the problem?"
"Frogs."
the chief replied.
"Frogs?"
"Yes, frogs. Don't you hear them, frogs? They're making the loudest noise you can imagine. I mean, all night long they are singing, and I can't get any sleep. Something must be done about them."
They said,
"Yes, sir."
Yes, sir.
"I want there to be an edict throughout the land, and I want every frog killed, so maybe I can get some sleep."
And all the wise men said,
"Yes, sir."
Yes, sir.
However, there was one wise woman in the court that always sat to the side and a little bit to the back, and she always sat there with a solemn look on her face, while everyone else said yes. And the chief always noticed her, and he was always irritated with this woman. The chief said,
"What is it? You are sitting there. Everyone is telling me, yes, I am right, and you're just sitting there. What have you to say for yourself?"
And that wise woman said,
Chief, everything is connected.
Well, what does that mean?
The wise woman said again,
Everything is connected, Your Highness.
Oh, ridiculous. Okay, everybody disband. And I want everyone to go out and get rid of those frogs so I can get some sleep.
And sure enough, they did. They got rid of every frog in the village, killed them all, exterminated them. And finally, their chief could sleep. And he slept soundly for days and days, and weeks, and months and months. One day, the chief sat in his palace on his throne, and a mosquito bit him. And there were more.
What is going on?
He quickly called a meeting.
Councilmen, come in, come in. They're everywhere. Mosquitoes, mosquitoes. Don't you see them?
They all came into the chambers.
Your Highness.
Your Highness, Your Highness.
Shut up and sit down. Don't you see them? They're everywhere. Mosquitoes, mosquitoes. Oh, you dumb people. I told you to get rid of the frogs, but no one told me this would happen if I did. Now the mosquitoes are killing us. How can you stand it?
Everyone was slapping themselves and trying to kill the mosquitoes. The chief looked to the side and saw that one wise woman that didn't agree with him. He said,
What do you have to say? You could have helped us. You could have saved us. What do you have to say for yourself?
and that one wise woman looked at the chief and said,
Your Highness, everything is connected.
a story, a story. Let it come. Let it go.
When a storyteller says, a story, let it come, let it go, that means we have reached the end of our story. Poor Chief, yes, sir. He did not understand that everything serves a purpose. There's a reason we are all here. We are all connected. Our next tale also takes place in Africa, and it's the story of a very sneaky spider named Anansi.
I'll go. I think you've got it. Anansi and the turtle goes to dinner. One day, Anansi, that spider everyone knows is a trickster, was just sitting down to eat a meal when Turtle passed by his house. Turtle had been traveling all day long and was very hungry. He smelled Anansi's yams cooking. His mouth began to water. Now, it was customary in this part of the world, and especially near holiday times, for the host to offer meals to anyone who happened to drop in at supper time. So Turtle knew Anansi would offer him some food if he stopped for a visit. Turtle knocked on Anansi's door. When Anansi heard the knock, he frowned. He did not want to share his meal with anyone. But he knew he had to answer the door. He opened the door and pretended he did not see Turtle. He looked way up, but of course, Turtle was way down to the ground. Anansi said.
No one here?
But just as he closed the door, Turtle called,
I'm down here, Anansi. It's me, Turtle.
Anansi had to look way down. And when Turtle caught Anansi's eye, he said,
How nice to see you, Anansi. And what a wonderful smell.
He sniffed the air, inhaling the scent of those delicious yams. Anansi knew he had no choice, and so he looked with some irritation at Turtle and said,
Come in then and share my meal.
But Anansi's heart was not in this offer. Anansi was greedy and did not want to share his meal with anyone. He stood a moment trying to figure out what he would do. When they sat, Anansi came up with an idea. Just as Turtle reached for a big bite of yam, Anansi said,
Turtle, it is impolite to come to the table without washing. Just look at your hands. They are filthy.
Turtle was ashamed. His hands were dirty, for he had been crawling down the road all day long. He crawled quickly outside and trundled as fast as he could towards the creek. And there he washed his hands, all four. Then he hurried back to Anansi's house. Just as Turtle reached for a yam, Anansi said,
Turtle, look at your hands.
well, sure enough, Turtle's hands were dirty again because he crawled up the trail that led to Anansi's house. So once again, he waddled back to the creek. This time, when he finished washing, he crawled upon the grass back to Anansi's house. By the time Turtle reached the table, the yams were all gone. Anansi had eaten every single one. Turtle's stomach rumbled with hunger, but he simply said,
Thank you for your hospitality, Anansi. Someday you must come and stop in at my home and have a meal with me.
A few days later, Anansi awoke feeling hungry, so he decided to go to Turtle's house at mealtime. Turtle lived at the bottom of the creek, but when Anansi arrived, Turtle was sitting on the bank.
Welcome, Anansi.
Turtle said.
Did you come for a meal?
Yes, I did.
Anansi said.
How kind of you to offer.
Follow me. The table is all set.
And he dived under the water. Anansi jumped in the water right behind Turtle. But instead of sinking, he popped right up to the surface and floated there. No matter how he tried to dive, he always popped up to the top. He jumped to rocks. He tried to swim with all his legs. Still could not reach Turtle's table. Then Anansi had an idea. He gathered all the pebbles on the shore and put them in the pockets of his handsome dinner jacket, the one he had worn especially for this meal. Soon, his pockets bulged with pebbles. This time, when Anansi dived, he sank down to the bottom of the creek and he swam to Turtle's table. Anansi's eyes popped wide open at the table full of shrimps, clams, and crabs. He eagerly reached for the plate, and Turtle said,
But Anansi, in my home, we always remove our dinner jackets before sitting down at the table.
Sure enough, Anansi saw that Turtle wore no jacket. Anansi looked longingly at the food, but he slowly slipped off his jacket. And as he did, the jacket sank to the bottom of the creek, and Anansi popped right to the top. He floated, frustrated and hungry, as he watched Turtle down below, chomping happily on a juicy crab.
I've been tricked,
Anansi cried. He lay upon the shore and thought of all the tricks he would play in return. And everyone knows Anansi did just that. A story. Let it come, let it go.
Are we enjoying the story so far? Well, griots would not only tell stories about what happens when we are selfish or what happens when we do not listen to wise advice. They also told stories that would give the people of the village hope and tell them how to be strong and how to find light when days were very dark and sad. Unfortunately, there were incredibly dark and sad days ahead for the people of Africa. That dark and sad time is what is known as the African slave trade. Millions of African people were stolen from their land and taken to new lands in the Caribbean and the Americas to work. They traveled the ocean by ship on a path we now call the Middle Passage.
The slave traders tried to take away the Africans' history and their stories, but they could not steal the stories because the stories lived inside of the people. In fact, Anansi found a new home in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, the griots became the elders or the older people in the community. And they no longer said, I'll go, I'll make. It changed to crick, crack, which means the same thing. Let's try it. Crick, crack. One more time. Crick, crack. Our next story is about Anansi, who traveled in the Caribbean.
Crick, Anansi and the Potter Beans. Long ago, before Anansi was known far and wide for his tricks, he and his wife, Aso, visited her family's house. The family was given a party for Anansi and Aso to celebrate the fine springtime weather. Anansi was proud of himself and he wished to show himself off. Let us dress in the finest clothes, he said to Aso, and she agreed. She loved to wear her pretty dresses and her gaily colored headscarves. And Anansi dressed in his finest clothes, and he wore a hat too, a nice tall one. I think I look important in this hat, he said to Aso, and she agreed. So off they set for her parents' house. And when they walked in, all the guests turned and smiled and gasped. They were impressed indeed. No one had seen a hat like Anansi's. And so all evening long, he walked around the room showing off his hat, his pipe, and his fancy trousers and bragging about how well he was doing. Anansi was proud of his wealth and he wanted everyone to admire him. But Anansi was also greedy and hungry, and he walked to the table spread with fine food, ready to fill his plate as full as he could. There it was, a feast fit for kings. Lemon soup and curried corn, sausages, chili, guinea fowl, eggs and fufu, and jollof rice, baked yams and boiled sweet potato, and roasted cassava. There were stews of every sort, goat and lamb and fish, and breads and spice butter and palm wine. Anansi ate and ate until his stomach was so full he couldn't eat another bite. But something was wrong. Anansi scratched his head. Where are the beans? He said and whispered to Aso. You see, Anansi loved hot beans more than anything else in the world. I don't see them, Aso whispered. But there's plenty of other food to eat, my dear. Anansi ate another helping of fish and another yam. And still he craved those nice hot beans. Then he began to wonder. His father-in-law knew he loved hot beans. Why would he neglect to serve them? Perhaps he was hiding those beans. Anansi sniffed the air. He sniffed again. Excuse me, he said to his father-in-law, but do you mind if I step outside to catch a breath of air? Of course not, his father-in-law said. But this was a trick. He had no intention of walking outside. He just wanted to sneak into the kitchen, and the way outside was through the kitchen. Off he walked, and sure enough, he caught a whiff of something. Yes, he said under his breath. There was the pot of beans boiling on the stove. He hiding them from me, Anansi said to himself. How dare he try to keep me from those beans? Actually, his mother-in-law had just forgotten to serve them. And so, checking to make sure no one was watching, Anansi found a satchel, and he filled us with spoonful and spoonful of beans. And when the bag was full, he placed it on his head and covered it up with his hat. Anansi, with those beans buried under his hat, walked quickly back into the party. So, he said to his wife, I think it's time for us to leave. But Anansi, the party is in our honor. Aso argued. Just then her father-in-law announced to everyone, I wish to make an important speech. Please, everyone gather around. Anansi's father-in-law began to talk. I want to say how proud I am of my fine son-in-law, Anansi. He is good to my daughter, and he is good to me and to my wife. And we wish everyone to know how fortunate we feel to have such a fine son-in-law. That's nice, Anansi said, but his head was sweating, for those beans were hot. Thank you. And now we'll leave, he said. But his father-in-law waved his hand. Not yet. Don't leave. I have so many things to say. And everyone began to clap their hands.
More!
More! They cried to the father-in-law. But now Anansi's hair was really worried, for those beans were burning his head. And sweat began to pour down his face. Thank you, Anansi cried. But you've already said more than enough. Never, said his father-in-law. There aren't enough fine words in the language for praising my fine son-in-law.
More!
Everyone cried. Now Anansi was in serious pain. And so he tried to lift the hat a little bit to let out some air. And when he did, the beans fell out of the bag and poured down his head onto the handsome trousers, his fine linen shirt, and down his sandals. What is this? His father-in-law cried at the sight. Are you a thief?
Thief!
Everyone cried, and Anansi ran out the door with his wife behind him.
Anansi's a thief! Anansi's a thief!
A thief! Everyone cried again. And ever since that day, Anansi had been bald, a symbol of his greed. A story. Let it come, let it go.
After leaving the Caribbean, the enslaved Africans that were still on the ships were transported to North America. Now, they were forbidden to read and write. However, the invaders could not stop the slaves from teaching their children lessons and sharing their stories through song and dance. Now, the animals changed and the language changed, but the lesson stayed the same. So now when the storytellers in the United States began a story, they would say, way back. And you say, way back. Okay, let's try it. Way back. You say, way back. Very good. I think we are ready for our next story about a signifying monkey.
Way back, you say way back. I say way back, you say way back. Signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You're always lying and signifying that the monkey with me. Oh, signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying, signifying that my monkey with me. Said the signifying monkey to the lion one day. When there's a great big elephant down the way, going around talking, I'm sorry to say, about your mama in a scandalous way. Yeah, you talk about your mama, your grandmama too. He don't show much respect for you. Now he weren't there, and I sure am glad. Cause what he said about your mama made me mad. Lion said, I'll fix him. I'll tear that elephant limb from limb. He shook the jungle with a mighty roar. Ah! And he took off like a shot from a 44. Found the elephant where the tall grass rose. Said, I'll come down punch you in your long nose. The elephant looked at the lion in surprise. Said, boy, you better pick on somebody your size. Lion wouldn't listen. He made a pass. The elephant slapped him down in the grass. Lion roared and he sprang from the ground. That's when that elephant really went to town. I mean, he whipped that lion for the rest of the day. I still don't see how that lion got away. He dragged on off more dead than alive. That's when that monkey started his signifying jive. Signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying and signifying that the monkey with me. Oh, signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying and you're signifying that the monkey with me. Monkey looked down and said, ooh, wait. What is this beat up mess I see? That you lying? Do tell. He whipped your head to a fairly well. Gave you a beating that was tough enough. You supposed to be king of the jungle, ain't that some stuff? You overgrown pussycat, don't you roar? I'll hop down there and whip your tail some more. Monkey got to laughing, jumping up and down. Took Mr. Limb and he plunged to the ground. The lion was on him with all 4 feet. Gonna grind that monkey to hamburger meat. Monkey looked up with tears in his eyes. Said, please, Mr. Lion, I apologize. I meant no harm. Please let me go. I'll tell you something that you really need to know. Lion stepped back to hear what he'd say. You know that monkey scampered up a tree and got away? What I wanted to tell you, the monkey hollered then. If you fool with me, I'll stick that elephant on you again. Lion said, you jive. You and your monkey children want to stay alive. Up in them trees is where you better stay. That's where they are to this very day. Signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always blind and signifying. There's no monkey with me. Oh, signifying monkey, stay up in your tree. You are always lying, signifying. There's no monkey with me. I said, there's no monkey with me. You heard me. There's no monkey with me. A story, let it come and let it go. Oh, a story, let it come and let it go.
That was a sneaky little monkey. Does he remind you of someone else who was sneaky? Anansi, that's right. Anansi made it to the United States, but he became she, and her name was Aunt Nancy, where she met her cousin, Brer Rabbit. Her cousin was just as sneaky and sometimes got into the same type of trouble.
Way back, Brer Rabbit earns $1 a minute. One fine morning, Brer Fox decided to plant him a patch of goober peas. He set to with a will, and before you know it, he had raked and hoed out a beautiful patch of ground and planted a fine planting of peas. It didn't take too long before those goober vines grew tall and long, and the peas ripened up good and smart. Now, Brer Rabbit, he'd watched Brer Fox planting the goobers, and he told his children and Ms. Rabbit where they could find the patch. Soon as those peas were ripe, the little rabbits and Brer Rabbit would sneak on in and grab up them goobers by the handful. It got so bad that when Brer Fox came to the goober patch, he could hardly find a pea to call his own. Well, Brer Fox, he was plenty mad that he had worked so hard on those peas, only to have them eaten by someone else. He suspected Brer Rabbit was to blame for this, but that cunning rabbit had covered his tracks so well that Brer Fox couldn't catch him. So Brer Fox came up with a plan. He found a smooth spot in his fence where a cunning rabbit could sneak in, and he set a trap for Brer Rabbit at that spot. He tied a rope to a nearby hickory sapling and bent it nearly double. Then he took the other end of the rope and made a loop knot, which he fastened with a trigger right around the hole in the fence. If anybody came through the crack to steal his peas, the knot would tighten around their body, the sapling would spring upright, and they would be left hanging from the tree for everyone to see. The next morning, Brer Rabbit came a-slipping through the hole in the fence. At once, the trigger sprung, the knot tightened on his forelegs, and the hickory tree snapped up right quick as you please. Brer Rabbit found himself swung aloft betwixt the heaven and the earth, swinging to and fro from the hickory sapling. He couldn't go up and he couldn't go down. He just went back and forth. Brer Rabbit was in a fix, no mistake. He was trying to come up with some glib explanation for Brer Fox when he heard someone a-rumbling and a-bumbling down the road. It was Brer Bear looking for a bee tree so he could get him some honey. As soon as Brer Rabbit saw Brer Bear, he came up with a plan to get himself free.
Howdy, Brer Bear.
he called cheerfully. Brer Bear squinted around here and there, wondering where the voice had come from. Then he looked up and saw Brer Rabbit swinging from the sapling.
Howdy, Brer Rabbit.
He rumbled.
How are you this morning?
Middling, Bear, just middling.
Brer Bear was wondering why Brer Rabbit was up in the tree, so he asked him about it. Brer Rabbit grinned and said that he was earning $1 a minute from Brer Fox.
$1 a minute?
Brer Bear explained.
I'm keeping the crows away from the goobers patch.
Brer Rabbit explained and went on to say that Brer Fox was paying $1 a minute to whomever would act as a scarecrow for him. Well, Brer Bear liked the sound of that. He had a big family to feed, and he could use the money. When Brer Rabbit asked him if he would like to have the job, Brer Bear agreed. Brer Rabbit showed him how to bend the sapling down and remove the knot from his forepaws. When Brer Rabbit was free, Brer Bear climbed into the knot, and soon he was hanging aloft betwixt the heaven and the earth, swinging to and fro from the sapling, growling at the birds to keep them away from the goober patch. Brer Rabbit laughed and laughed at the sight of Brer Bear up there in the sapling. He scampered down the road to Brer Fox's place and told him that his trap had been sprung and the goober thief was hanging from the hickory tree. Brer Fox grabbed his walking stick and ran down the road after Brer Bear. When Brer Fox saw Brer Bear hanging from the tree, Brer Fox called him a goober thief. Brer Fox ranted and raved and threatened to hit Brer Bear with his walking stick. He yelled so loud that Brer Bear didn't have time to explain nothing. Brer Rabbit knew that Brer Bear would be plenty mad at him when he found out he had been tricked. And so he ran on down the road and hid in the mud beside the pond so that only his eyeballs stuck out, making him look like a big old bullfrog. By and by, a very grumpy Brer Bear came a lumbering down the road.
Howdy, Brer Bullfrog.
Brer Bear exclaimed when he saw Brer Rabbit's eyes sticking out of the mud.
You seen Brer Rabbit around here anywhere?
Rabbit? Brer Rabbit just went down the road. Rabbit?
He told the grumpy Brer Bear in a deep croaking voice that sounded just like the voice of a frog. Brer Bear thanked him and trotted down the road, growling fiercely. When Brer Bear was out of sight, Brer Rabbit jumped out of the mud. He washed himself off in the pond and then scampered home, chuckling to himself at how he had escaped Brer Fox and Brer Bear, and already thinking up a new way to get into Brer Fox's goober patch to get him some peas to eat. A story. Let it come, let it go. Ribbit.
Our last story is about an ancient people who forgot that they could fly. They were like caged birds who wanted to feel the freedom of flight.
Freebird leaps on the back of the winds and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down its narrow cage can seldom see through its bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to see. A caged bird sings with a fearful trill, things unknown but longs for still, and his tune is heard on a distant hill, for a caged bird sings of freedom. A free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a cage bird stands on a grave of dreams, and his shadow shouts on a nightmare screams. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to see. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Kakua. Kakua. Ooh, ah, ah. Ooh, ah, ah. Kakua.
Way back in parts of West Africa, there was an ancient people that could fly. They would spread their arms wide and big, beautiful wings would appear. They would soar up in the sky and sing this sweet song.
Kakua, kakua, ooh, ooh,
Can you try that?
kakua, ooh,
They would pick berries from the trees and they would soar around the skies as they pleased. And everything was in its place. Until one day, some invaders came with a plan to steal all the resources from the land. And in time, they grew very greedy and even stole the people, chained them up one by one and two by two. Most of the flying Africans forgot what they could do. Well, the oppressors stripped them of their freedom and their name. And in this land of the free and home of the brave, the African people were made to be slaves. Then the oppressors called themselves masters and overseers. And they made sure the African people worked to make their money out in the field. Well, during this time, there was a young girl named Lucretia. What was her name?
Lucretia.
Lucretia. And Lucretia was a wise young girl. She had been sold away from her mother and was being raised on a different plantation by the elders. Now, the elders taught her lessons and they told her stories all the time. Now, some of the elders were very sad and very angry, and they wanted to give up. They would tell her stories about the fight being over and not being able to go on anymore. And they would sing songs like this.
Soon I will be done with the troubles of this world. Troubles of this world, the troubles of this world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to live with God.
Now, when Lucretia heard those stories, she wanted to give up. She wondered if her people would ever be free. She didn't know. But then there were those elders who would say, "No, girl, we can't give up. We've got to be angry. We've got to fight." And they would sing songs like this.
Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Everything is gonna be alright. Fight on just a little while longer. Fight on just a little while longer. Fight on just a little while longer. Everything is gonna be alright.
Now, when Lucretia heard those songs, she wanted to fight. But that wasn't good either, because the oppressors had these whips and they would keep her down, and she didn't want to go out that way either. Then she took to the elders who told her stories about home. They would tell her stories about the richness of her homeland. They would tell her stories about her people and how they used to fly. And on those nights, when Lucretia heard those stories, she would have these dreams, these sweet dreams where she would fly. And in those dreams was the first time she would feel a sense of freedom. She would have those dreams night after night. And over weeks, she would not only feel her freedom, but the freedom of her children and her children's children. One day, she was very ill, and she could not work as hard as she used to. She was out there on the plantation giving her very best, but just couldn't seem to get it together. Well, the oppressor came over to her, and he began to yell at her. And all the other enslaved Africans gathered around the young girl and was trying to help her. But he pulled out his whip, and he began to whip her and whip her. As she fell to her knees, she closed her eyes and she remembered the sweet dreams she had in the night before. She could feel the stories of her people in her body. And with the little breath she had left, she began to call out very sweetly.
Kakua, Kakua,
The other Africans heard her, and they began to sing with her. And they could feel each other getting stronger, and they sang out louder. And just then, Lucretia stood up, and she looked her oppressor in the eye, and she stepped into the air, and she began to fly. The other Africans kept singing, and they became a mighty chorus, and they rose in the air and flew. They all flew to freedom, and they flew real high. They flew over the mountains of adversity and over the oceans of inferiority. They were like beautiful brown birds all across the deep blue sky. And the sweetest rhythms of their stories and their songs inside. You see, the African people stood out.
oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom. Kakua, Kakua.
a story. Let it come, let it go.
We are so happy you came out and allowed us to share these extraordinary stories with you. Today, the art of African American storytelling is dying.
We no longer gather around the knees of our elders, our own very special griot, to learn from the mistakes of the Yes Sir Chief, Anansi the Spider, the Signifying Monkey, and Brer Rabbit.
We don't teach our children how to fly over the mountains of adversity and inferiority. This tradition has been replaced with YouTube, cell phones, and video games.
We cannot let this special tradition die. It is a part of who we are. And if we lose our stories, we lose ourselves, our history.
The stories we told you today were passed down from us to us from our great grandmother and grandfathers who lived across the ocean, and now we give them to you. Who will you tell them to? What would you do with them?
A story.
A story.
Let it come.
Let it go.
Let it go.
Let it go.
So here's a song called Through the Fire.
Yes, thank you.
Broken lives and broken wings of your man, so you can leave and fly again and move to the place that love has begun. Broken lives and broken wings you can mend, so you can leave and fly again and move to the place that love has prepared. So awesome how this fire can heal, even when it hurts so bad. So awesome how this fire can heal, even when it hurts so bad. Through the fire, more dead men make me smile again. Through the fire, I'm whole again. Through the fire, love took my pain, make me smile again. Through the fire, I'm whole again. Broken lives and broken wings, love can mend, so you can leave and fly again and move to the place that love is prepared. Love will take your life and make it new, so you can leave and smile again and move to the place that love is prepared. So awesome how this fire can heal, even when it hurts so bad. So awesome